Say that again, go on. Say, no, you say it. Someone say it loud.
What's your favourite episode from Doctor Who? Do you have a favourite episode?
My favourite what?
Do you have a favourite episode from Doctor Who?
Well, no, you know, I mean, oddly, I can remember things like Talons of Weng Chiang or whatever it is. It all mixed in my head. You know, I didn't really watch Doctor Who very much because I didn't have to, you know. Why I stayed so long is I was so happy being Doctor Who that it didn't matter about watching the thing. I just was playing Doctor Who. And the reason I didn't watch it was not because I didn't care. It was because I became very quickly opinionated about which shot selection would go. In other words, I was interested in the editing. Now, when you're an actor, you don't have much control over that. But so what used to annoy me, I'd do the scenes, and then I'd watch the episode occasionally, and I think, no, that we did a better take somewhere else. All actors think like that, you know. And so I just gave up doing that, and then just promoted the program. And I did whatever the audiences liked. If someone said, "I like the way you do that," I'd do more of it, you know, because I'm a professional pleaser, really. Not a bad
character of Captain Rum in Blackadder. And I just wanted to ask about, you know, you seem to really enjoy it. You know, did you have much artistic input into the character, or was it already made out for you?
The question is about Captain Rum in Blackadder, for those of you who ever saw that. Actually, no, it was a pretty miserable experience playing Captain Rum, you see, because Rowan Atkinson, who is so absolutely brilliant as a comedian, as a grotesque, whatever, and highly intelligent, is highly opinionated and is willing to tell everyone how to do it, you know, which annoyed me, and so I completely ignored him and did what I wanted to do. And as I was doing that and watching Stephen Fry and the others all falling around with laughter, I thought, yeah, I'm onto something here, and so that's the way I wanted to do it. Anyway, when you do programs like that, you do it twice in the afternoon. You do a technical run, and then you have a cup of tea, and then the audience come in, and then you do it again. And so when we were going in for the technical run, that's called a dress rehearsal, I suppose, Atkinson said to me, he sent for me, a bit grand, sent for me. So I went over and said, what is it? And he said, listen, he's extremely eloquent and persuasive. He said, Tom, you're going to be marvelous in this. He said, but you're making just one or two mistakes here, and I can put you right because I'm in it every week, and I know what works in this program. So I said, yeah. So what do you think I should do? He said, I think you should actually, this character that you're playing so extravagantly, I think you're on the wrong tack. He said, I think you should play him as a crashing bore. So I said, oh right, that's very interesting. Yeah, that had never occurred to me. And so I said, oh right, okay. So how do you mean a bore? Well, he said, you know, underplay it. He said, and be kind of stupid and not know what's going on. So I said, okay, Ron. So I knew the dress rehearsal was coming up in 15 minutes, so off we went. And I was in the first scene, actually. And so I did it what Rowan said, because I thought, you know, there's only one more evening of this, so I did it the way Rowan said, and it was just watched by the producer, the director, the art director, and everyone else watching it. And we finished the show, and went back to my dressing room, thudding on the stairs, and suddenly 3 people burst into my dressing room, the producer, the director, and the art director, and said, what the hell's going on, Tom? Are you ill? So I said, no, I'm just doing what the leading man said I sarcastically. I had no idea, you see, when I did this job, that you tell me to do one thing, and then the leading man tells me to do another. I don't know where I am, you see, so that's why that's what Rowan wants me to do. But they said, Tom, you know, they were terribly embarrassed. They said, well, Tom, you know, he gets anxious, he's just trying it on. Do it the way you've been rehearsing it. So off we went again, new orders, and then I played it the way it was rehearsed. And he was in the first scene with me, and he never spoke to me for the rest of the show. And after that, there was a party afterwards, upstairs, and I, of course, couldn't go, because I couldn't allow myself to be snubbed publicly like that. And the only consolation I have of that is that it's been repeated about 35 times. So I got 35 times my fee. And that has made up for those boring notes that Rowan Atkinson offered me. And also I was stopped in the street, you know, by people who were, and sometimes I went to conventions where people came as Captain Rum, which is very odd at a Doctor Who convention.
I know you mentioned earlier that when you went on stage you were playing Doctor Who. Now I can't remember if Life and Loves of She-Devil came before or after Doctor Who, after I think, didn't it? You know the Life and Loves of She-Devil? Do you remember that?
It was
Life
after,
and Loves of She-Devil.
It was after Doctor Who, yeah.
It was after, yeah.
That was it after Doctor Who?
Yeah. Because you were very...
Did I play him like Doctor Who?
No, you were a very strange character in that.
Oh yeah, well that's true because there was a very, very explicit bed scene. Do you remember a girl with a big mole on her cheek? Yeah.
So they did they tell you specifically not to play it like Doctor Who though? That was my question.
No, I don't think they did. Actually, they didn't tell me anything at all. They just said get on with it because there were an awful lot of bed scenes, weren't there?
I think it was absolutely wonderful for Carter. They were
Yeah. It was there were a lot of bed scenes, which was embarrassing, you know, because they said just go for it.
Yes.
I mean, I thought, well, what does that mean? Let's go for it. But actually, what was the girl's name? Do you remember? Julie T. Wallace.
That's right, yes.
And she said in an interview, she said the best sex I ever had on television was with old Doctor Who, Tom Baker. Yeah. He said he really was very convincing. I mean, of course, it wasn't realistic since I've got no sense of direction. That's why I never had any children. But actually that was fun to do, playing a kind of...
Want to choose you to be the next Doctor?
What was it like when you were being chosen to play Doctor Who?
Well, it was very anxious because, you know, it was a very famous programme, and I heard that John Pertwee was finishing, and I'd heard about several names being bandied around. I can't remember the name now. A fellow called Mr. Pastry, I think, Richard Hearn. And it was offered to Graham Crowden from the National Theatre, and was offered to an actor, a very accomplished comedian called Jim Dale. So I was just one after the other. But it just so happened that the BBC office where they were casting this was right next to the Odeon in Shepherd's Bush Green. And it happened that at that week or something I went up for it. I met these people and they seemed quite interested in me. But it so happened that I was in a film right next door. I mean, yes, 50 yards away. I was in a film called The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which I'd done a couple of years before for Ray Harryhausen. And so the BBC thought, well, the producer and the writer and a director and a couple of more people, they said, we'll go and see Tom at the Odeon. You know, it's only 50 yards away, so they called a cab. That's the way they do things at BBC. No, they didn't. That's not true. They called two cabs because there were four of them. You know. And they went there and didn't tip the driver. And then I was, playing a kind of wizard and half disappearing, and with lots of special effects. And I think that's what swung it for me, really, because it was only about a year before had I done it, and that's what influenced Barry Letts to give me the job. And when he called me in, and I saw one or two big officials, and they said, "Tom, we want you to be the next Doctor Who." And I said, "Yeah, and I want me to be the next Doctor Who." And they said, "Right, so that's it now." But when you walked at the BBC, whatever happens at the BBC, if it's important, the important statement always ends with "but." It's a kind of chilling "but," you know. It's like they say, "Listen, we thought you were absolutely terrific last night, but," oh God, here comes the dagger. And so they said, "We want you to be Doctor Who, Tom, but you mustn't tell anybody for 2 weeks." Now, I hadn't worked for a long time, and I was working on a building site. I was on a building, so I used to make the tea, you know. Very good tea. I was very popular. I really made excellent tea. Yorkshire Gold it was. And I used to, you know, help out. I wasn't any good. So there I was on a building site for 2 weeks and going to the pub at night where I was known. It was in a nice Pimlico in London. And anyway, the first night, when I got to the pub that night after being offered the part, a fellow in the pub called Steve, he said to me, they knew I was an actor, of course, there were several actors around there. They said, "Hello, Tom, got a job, have you?" I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Oh, really? You're looking very, you know, glittery tonight." I said, "Am I?" "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, you look as if you've had some good news." Which was a very acute observation, wasn't it, from someone who's next to me. I said, "Oh, no." I said, "No." I said, "I have been going out for little jobs, you know, but it's quite difficult." And so I smoothed that out. And of course, the 2 weeks passed. And I told the guys on the building site that I wasn't going to be there the next day. They used to call me Sir Lawrence. There were always this badinage going on. "Okay, Sir Lawrence," they said, "Okay, Sir Lawrence." So off I went to the BBC in the morning. In those days, the Evening Standard came out first at midday edition. So I went down to the BBC where the big press coverage in those days, you know, it was a big deal. And thousands of pictures were taken of Elizabeth Sladen and me. And of course, the main picture went out on the midday edition of the Evening Standard. Now, the guys I was working with, they were always putting bets on in around the lunch hour. And so when they went to the betting shop, right on the front page of the Standard, which was a big deal in those days, was Tom Baker, the guy who was making the tea, you know, who couldn't handle a Kango drill, and you know, and if we shouted at him, he burst into tears. They actually couldn't believe it, and they never expected to see me again. And so the next day, I turned into work at 7 o'clock. Absolutely amazed them. And of course, I had some money. And I said, "I've just come to say goodbye and everything like that. I'll come round and see you at 5 o'clock. They were very thrilled. And at 5 o'clock, I turned up, you know, with a case full of booze and some pork pies, because none of them were Jewish. And we had a bit of a knees up, you know, and they were very, very thrilled about it. And so the next day, I had to go back because the press office heard about this. So the next day, I had to go back and then get made up as a labourer. And there's a wonderful picture in the Express of me and 6 other fellows leaning on shovels, you know, with ciggies, drawing on ciggies. In those days, everybody was smoking, you know. Those were heavenly days, you know, to actually come from obscurity to suddenly being, you know, I wouldn't say a sex symbol, but, you know, someone who was well known for his sonic screwdriver anyway. Who's that squeaking in the corner?
What's the matter? Apparently, the next question is, what was your reaction to when you saw how long the scarf was you had to wear for Doctor Who?
Well, James Atkinson, who later on went on to become an Oscar-winning designer, I've told this story millions of times. James didn't know, he knew all about design, but he didn't know anything about knitting. And so when he wanted a scarf, we were going around various costume houses and trying on clothes. It's a marvelous thing when you're an actor and you go into a room where there are thousands of costumes, racks and racks of them, and you go among them and try on different clothes. Anyway, we tried on this kind of crazy outfit, and Jim said, which should be a scarf. I think actually there's a Toulouse-Lautrec picture of someone who looks vaguely like Doctor Who with a scarf. Anyway, Jim, because it was the BBC, just ordered up 2 van loads of assorted wool and shipped it round to a woman, a lovely woman called Begonia Pope, her name was. She was a Catholic. And so they said, "We want you to knit it up." So this woman, who was so excited about knitting for the BBC and was a prodigious knitter, I mean, she really was. I think she actually won a medal at the Olympic Games in the days when there was an award for knitting. Anyway, after about 2 weeks, they sent round to our house, and this little woman couldn't open the front door. She had to talk from the bedroom window because the house was full, it was only a little too up, too down. The house was absolutely full of scarf. She knitted up all the wool, which would have had the scarf go across that whole front row there. And so when we got it, Jim Atkinson, quick as a flash, said, "We'll keep it, ridiculously long." They couldn't keep it that long because, no, we couldn't. There would have been uproar. Anyway, they wouldn't have liked that. So that's how it became so long. And of course, because everyone's teasing actors, especially when they're as silly as I am, people used to stand on my scarf at the takes. The crew used to think that was terribly funny. And it stretched and stretched, and that became a kind of an iconic sign, didn't it? The scarf, and children were having long scarves. Now, you see, it wouldn't be allowed because there was a lot of children, of course, were breaking their legs or their necks, or other children's legs or necks, But in those days, it just didn't seem to matter. And I've met quite a few cripples in my time who said, every time I get a twinge in my hip, he said, I think about your scarf. They take it very well indeed, yes. They're very...
Hi. What was your relationship like with the other actors who played your companions?
Do you mean with the girls? Yeah, well, the companions were all girls, as far as I remember. Well, it was pretty frosty by that time. Because there were too many of us in the shot, by that time, the program was out of focus. Because in all the takes of the group, it didn't make sense. There wasn't enough dialogue, there wasn't enough tension to go round. There were all these, little people around. So that wasn't, no. By that time I was getting very fed up with it, And by that time also we had a new producer who became a friend of mine, but as a producer, I definitely didn't rate him at all. And there was quite a lot of friction there. And it was around that time that I decided to quit the program. But afterwards, I became quite friendly with that producer, John Nathan Turner. Very friendly, yeah. He's dead now. One of the reasons I don't work very hard now, too much, is that the word has got round that after working with Tom Baker, you're not likely to live very long. That you might actually have a sudden heart attack or die in agony. And directors, of course, don't want to die in agony, and so they avoid me like the plague. And that's why I do so many conventions, where you're not at all frightened. You have no reason to be. Yep.
Next question.
What was it like performing with Matt on the anniversary episode?
What was it like being with Matt Smith? Well, during when I went to the night, I had to be driven through the night for that little scene in the anniversary one. All the way from, I live in East Sussex near Rye, and I had to drive through the night to Cardiff in the winter. And I got there early. They sent an amazing car for me and an amazing driver. And I arrived, instead of arriving at about 7:30 in the morning, I arrived at about 4:45 in a freezing morning, and just on a film lot, and it was very, very painful because I was walking around in a great state of nerves until just before 8 o'clock. So I was a wreck by the time I got onto the set. But Matt Smith could not have been nicer. He was very excited and amusing about it. But it was a hard job because in the interval, when I was in Doctor Who, I knew all about the cameras from an actor's point of view, and where the shots were, watching all the other angles. But the cameras have all changed now. The takes are slower now, with the camera changing focus or going in or out or whatever, or going wider. And I didn't quite know what was going on, so it was a bit miserable, really. But he was just simply wonderful young fellow, yes. And I got away as quickly as I could, and I didn't see it, but it did me some good, I think. Some people were quite amused by it, I think, but it wasn't a pleasant experience, no. But just because it was unpleasant didn't mean it wasn't profitable.
By the canvassers to do with the recent election?
Well, yes, I was, but I kept mistaking them for Jehovah's Witnesses. So I was always saying how close I'd been to Jesus as a boy, and how I always wanted to be able to walk on water. So they didn't know what I was talking about, quite naturally. Since obviously it was a Labour Party, and they're not interested in people who walk on water. So yeah, I don't really have political opinions, because I used to have a one time I go on marches and things like that, try and change the world. But now, as one gets closer to, as one feels one's mortality, it has no relevance to me. I just hope you all have a good time and it goes on. And my wife seems terribly happy with the results. She said, "We did it." I had no idea what we'd done. I said, "When?" Well, she said, "Last night," and I had no. She was talking about the election. She's a very nice girl, yeah. She's obviously a very strange taste in men.
Next question, please.
Go on, this one.
Who has a question?
Go on.
When you were filming Doctor Who, I know you were quite interested in trying to get a script and filming for a film of Doctor Who. How frustrating?
Yeah, the man's asking about, do you remember there's a rumour that I did write a script with Ian Marter, who died so sadly young, because I think he forgot to take his insulin or something. Ian and I wrote this script called Doctor Who Meets Scratchman, which is a good title, I thought. And we wrote the script up and we had a director and everything like that, but nothing came of it because it was quite difficult to organise because of the copyright. The BBC seemed enthusiastic, but then you're into very great copyright details. And James Hill, who was going to be the director, actually then went off and then years later did, of course, Wurzel Gummidge with John Pertwee, which was such a huge hit, and in which John was excellent, wasn't he? So that script actually has been traced. I'd forgotten about it, of course, because in those days I was clattering about, very haphazardly, and leaving possessions all over the place. So I lost my script, I lost I kept having to start again, go out and buy, in a dressing gown and buy clothes, because it was just dreadful way to go on. But so it got lost, but Big Finish have traced it, and they're trying to work out if they can do something with it. But again, it comes into the BBC copyright and also the estate of James Hill. So I don't know what might happen. It would be very interesting to do it on audio, but I don't have high hopes about that. It doesn't matter now because I've got a big contract with Big Finish. I'm working Big Finish now. I must be 4 years ahead. These things take quite a long time. There's a long gestation period for the sound effects. But I'm maybe 4 or 5 years ahead in my volume. So some of you, when you grow into middle age, will be hearing new things when I compounded am with clay, as Shakespeare said. But never mind, that's a bit...
What was it like being the narrator on Little Britain?
Oh, being on Little Britain was a scream from start to finish, yeah. I got on very well with Matt and David. Yeah, it was a hoot, that. And because, you were allowed to say, because of the comedy, you were allowed to say the most appalling things, weren't you? And because they were so appalling, somehow or other people found them funny and everything like that. And I got quite a lot of voiceovers, or I got quite a lot of commentaries, especially from religious people. Buddhists, they quite liked that delivery, and they thought it might liven it up a bit, because Buddhists are rather serene, aren't they, and happy, and they float a lot, I think. Yeah, and they like orange and seeds, yeah. So I've got me a bit of work, yeah. I thought, and I also never handled the girls very well. If I had to help them, I always did it awkwardly, because, I came from somewhere where there weren't any girls. It's very odd. I was obviously conceived miraculously somewhere, and the girls liked that they did. But when Louise came, of course, when we were escaping, I always, as a gentleman, used to do a lot of sharp, plastic shafts like that. And so I used to push Elizabeth in there to escape, and everything like that. And that was fine. And I'd scramble along after her. But of course, when Louise arrived with so few clothes on, I couldn't actually push Louise in first to follow her, since obviously, the news of the world would have been after me or something. It was simply an appalling thought. So I used to say things like, look, this is, Leela, this is terribly dangerous, I'll go first. No, you go first. Or whatever it was, And Louise and I still laugh about all those days, because she frequently comes into Big Finish. Oh, those were the days. Yeah, those were the days. And she said, Tom, you were so cold towards me in those days. I can't believe it. It's terrible, isn't it? Now we're such devoted pals and, email each other, and she sends me tickets for shows and things. Yeah, how strange it is. So long ago. It may be, actually, that what I've been telling you this afternoon, it may be that none of this is true. Yeah, which is a terrifying thought, isn't it? You've been wasting your time listening to me telling lies. But sometimes, you see, when I wrote a book once, I don't want to go into many details, but it was supposed to be an autobiography, and it had some kind of scandalous success. And recently, a film company somebody wanted to put it out again. And so they wanted me to write 600 words or something to just bring it a bit up to date. And so I had a look at it, and some of it is very, very vituperative, and some of it is very sad. But when I looked at it again, I thought, was it really like that? And some of that anger that I felt towards religion in the past, I was brought up very strict Roman Catholic, some of that anger evaporated, and it didn't seem all that important anymore. So, it's really rather like a story I told when I was walking past the Palladium in Argyle Street. A little voice said, "Hello, Tommy." And I hadn't been called Tommy since the last century. So I turned round, and there was a little old lady there with long hair and lots of bags. And I said, the way actors always do, when anyone says anything to me in the street, they're engaging me in conversation, all actors say, if they're polite, have we worked together? That's a reasonable thing. And often they say, yes, we were in Bristol Old Vic together. And I say, oh, yes. And so you talk a bit, and then you part. So I said to this little old lady, I said, oh, goodness, you're looking well. But didn't say the name. I didn't say, you're looking well, Martha. I said, hello, you're looking well. That was a mistake, She said, Tommy, you don't remember me. And I said, I felt silly then, so I said, well, you would. I said, oh, yes, I do. I said, lying through my teeth. I said, you were Kate Hardcastle and She Stoops to Conquer at the National Theatre, and I played your husband. He said, no, we didn't. I said, oh, no. Wait, hold on, you were the mother in an inspector call in Northwest. No, she said, I wasn't. I better stop here, because I had about 11 of these inquiries, and she kept saying, no, it wasn't. And by that time I was distraught, and I said, but then, I'm so sorry, I don't remember you. But we were in a play together, were we? She said, no, we used to be married. Now, that made my legs shake, I tell you. Because I've got quite a good memory, really, and I really, I think I would have remembered. So instead of just running or shouting, taxi, and diving into the taxi or throwing myself under a fire engine, I said, like the idiot I am, I said, really? I said, were we happy? And instantly I said that, I'd gone over the line, of course, into this world of a woman who remembers she said, yes, we were ecstatically happy, Tommy. And so I said, where did we live? And she said, in Shepherd's Bush, Blythe Road. And I said, Blythe Road, Shepherd's Bush, really? And I thought, one part of my head was saying, listen, Tom, run for it, kid. Just run for it. Instead of which I said, and children, did we have children? At which her head went down a bit. She said, no, Tommy, no, I never did. I said, well, it's nice to see you again. And I backed away from her, and she backed away from me, and that was the last I saw of her. But I'm telling you that story because some people have very vivid imaginations. This is apropos of my book, that as I relate something, recalling the actual intensity of my indignation or self-pity or rage, and then after a while, as time passes on and on and on, it can dilute, and you think, and suddenly it's not all that important, you know? And so therefore I had to say to this company recently, look, I've reread the book, you know, first of all, I don't really believe most of it, but I don't really want to add anything more. I don't want to, you know, exacerbate or attack or say these unkind things. I said quite a lot of unkind things about people, because publishers like you to say, you know, angry things. I refuse to do it. And so the book, thank God, will not be republished. Although recently, there's been an inquiry from a company who wanted me to cooperate because they're making a film of my life. I rang my agent and said, I've heard that this company are making a film of my life. And they're actually advertising already for character actors. They've obviously read my book carefully, to be in this film. And when I checked out my agent, she said, this is a very, very tricky area, Tom. We cannot necessarily stop anyone from making a film about anyone. Of course, she said, if they libel or slander you in some way, that's a different thing. But anyone is quite free to make, you know, a film, as long as they don't make allegations which would be hurtful. So there you are. So somebody might be actually planning, I must find out who they are really, and probably, you know, get dressed up and go along, you know, for one of the parts. The people long dead. That would be quite a good trick, wouldn't it, really? Under an assumed name, playing the main villain of the piece. You know, I have all sorts of thoughts like that. When you get near death, it's amazing the thoughts you have. You know, anything to stop thinking about that soon I won't be here. You know, I'm amazed about how short life is, which you people so younger here cannot actually dream of what I mean about, you know, that the average life is less than 1,000 months, you know, 4,000 weeks. Amazing, eh? 29,000 days. How are you feeling?
Unfortunately, and ironically, time has passed us by, flown by, and I'm sorry to say, our time with Mr. Baker is sadly almost at an end. But I would just like to ask everybody, thank you all for being here and celebrating Mr. Baker, and thank you, Tom, for being here to join us today in Folkestone. It's a very, very much, and I think I can speak on everybody's behalf, it is such an honour for you to be here today. We all admire you, and we think you are the most amazing person for being not only just in Doctor Who, but one of the most amazing icons of this country, and we thank you. So please, everyone put your hands together for Mr. Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, the legend who is Mr. Tom Baker. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I see your hands for your first question, please? Young lad over there, what would be your question?
Hello Tom, who's your favourite master from Doctor Who?
Well, I remember when I used to watch it, I used to like Roger Delgado. But then when I was doing it, I had rather a soft spot for Anthony Ainley because I lived in a house with his brother, and Anthony also had been a young actor with me. So I liked the difference. Roger was more sinister, maybe more powerful, whereas Anthony was rather like an Edwardian, you know, pantomime, you know, funny way of walking or whatever. But he adored being the master, and apparently when people used to ring him up, he used to answer, he'd say, "Hello, this is the master," which is a bit spooky, really. But and I think he used to sign himself the master in his love letters. And after a while, of course, it frightened girls away. And of course, if I was playing an inspector, or, I don't know, an ambassador or something like that, a diplomat in some play by Noel Coward, the fans who came and paid, you were coming to see old Doctor Who, really. So whatever I did, whether I was an inspector or a diplomat, or Lady Bracknell for that matter, I played it in the style of Doctor Who. And the fans came and they absolutely adored it. That's what they come for. I didn't actually produce a sonic screwdriver, but I did lots of double takes and rolled my eyes a lot. And the other actors, of course, hated me. They absolutely hated me. The actors get very jealous of each other, especially if one actor is playing actually out to the audience, and like I was, quite shameless. But they couldn't really complain, because otherwise, I was the one who was bringing them in. And they weren't coming in to see me not being the Doctor. They were coming out of curiosity to see how I would try and escape and play the Doctor. And of course, it would have been terrible if I had escaped. If they'd said, "That's not the Doctor," I would have been appalled. So that's the way I carried on. After a while, of course, quite a few actors would not want to work with me. And I don't blame them, really. I don't blame them at all. Because I've always just considered, pleasing the audience is the most important thing. So in that way, I was not considered a very serious actor. I really shouldn't have ever tried to be a straight actor. I wanted to make people laugh, and I wanted to play unreal characters, interesting, fascinating characters from my imagination or from someone else's imagination, rather than anything realistic. I mean, that's why I wasn't interested in being in films, trying to play a villain. I remember when I had to I played a character called Rasputin once, and I had to be very rough with someone, and I couldn't do it. He said, "Tom, you're behaving like a girl. I mean, you're behaving like a nurse. You're supposed to be one of the most powerful men in Russia." So that wasn't a great success either. Next question.
We want to say thank you for coming to Folkestone. Brilliant. Do you regret then changing your costumes for the seasons? Because I really like the original costume in Robot, but do you regret not going back to that in your last season, like the iconic hat and the scarf, the red jacket?
Could you kind of paraphrase that? Ash, you've lost sound.
Hello. Oh yes. Do you regret them changing your costumes for Doctor Who for the kind of last seasons? Do you wish you'd gone back to your original Robot kind of look, like I'm wearing now?
Well, sign it. Can you sign it now?
The question was,
Here, follow mine.
do you...
And it gives me back.
Ash, the question was, do you regret the change of costume from the original concept to later on when it was preferred in the outfit? Would you rather finish the series in your iconic multicoloured scarf and hat?
That's an interesting question. Did I regret the passing of the kind of bohemian scarf and hat to a later thing? No, I didn't, because at that time I was very besotted with the work of June Hudson, I beg your pardon. June had a great admiration for me, and when people admire me passionately, I'm very, very vulnerable. I mean, I'm likely to agree with everything they say. And so
beware, Tom, they're all here. They adore you.
June's flattery was amazing, and by the time she finished with me, I mean, my costume was even more and more operatic, wasn't it? Do you remember that burgundy and fantastic thing? But so it was wonderful to work with June, who absolutely lives for Doctor Who, and I dare say might even die for Doctor Who, but I hope not. But no, I don't regret those changes in the costume. The more extravagant it got, the better. Of course, at the end, I was beginning to slow as well. I wasn't as agile at the end because I was 7 or 8 years older. no regrets there. And I think of June Hudson constantly because she sends me cards, lovely drawings of myself. How she imagines me. It's amazing the way she sees me, looking like some young angel. Although, as you can see, I'm past my best.
Not at all. Not